The relentless Cambodian sun beat down on the crimson awning of the Pyongyang restaurant. As Yeonhee stepped through its ornate entrance for the first time in March 2016. At 24 years old, she carried herself with the practiced grace expected of someone from her background. Daughter of a mid-ranking Workers' Party official in Pyongyang. Graduate of the Pyongyang University of Foreign Studies, fluent in Mandarin and English. Her selection for this overseas assignment had been presented as a tremendous honor. A testament to her family's loyalty and her own exemplary service record. The reality, she would soon discover, was far more complicated. The restaurant occupied a prime location in Phnom Penh's bustling diplomatic quarter. Its exterior adorned with traditional Korean architectural elements that seemed almost defiant in their proclamation of North Korean identity. Inside, the walls displayed carefully curated photographs of the Supreme Leader and elaborate murals depicting idyllic scenes of the North Korean countryside. Images designed to project an idealized vision of the homeland to foreign diners. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and the dining hall could accommodate up to 200 guests during peak hours. Everything was designed to impress, to project prosperity and cultural sophistication. Yeonhee was one of 18 young women selected for this particular restaurant. All between the ages of 22 and 28. All from families deemed sufficiently loyal to the regime. They had undergone 6 months of intensive preparation at a special training facility in Nampo, where they learned not just the mechanics of restaurant service, but also how to present themselves as living embodiments of North Korean excellence. They practiced their smiles until they became reflexive, rehearsed their song and dance performances until every movement was synchronized, and studied the proper responses to any question a foreign customer might pose. The training had been explicit about their dual role. They were servers, yes, but also representatives of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, tasked with earning precious foreign currency, while simultaneously conducting what was euphemistically termed friendship diplomacy. Every interaction with customers was an opportunity to challenge negative perceptions of their country, every smile a small victory in the larger ideological struggle. The instructors had been clear their annual foreign currency quota was set at $30,000 per person. Failure to meet this target would bring shame not only upon themselves, but upon their families back home. The living quarters for the restaurant. Workers occupied the entire 3rd floor of the building, accessible only through a secured stairwell with a door that locked from the outside. 18 women shared 6 rooms, 3 to a room, sleeping on thin mattresses laid out on the floor in traditional Korean style. Yeonhee's roommates were Sun-young, a 26-year-old from Hamhung, with a background in traditional dance, and Mi-young, a 23-year-old from Chongjin who had studied music at the Pyongyang Conservatory. The first thing Yeonhee learned was that privacy was an illusion. Each room was assigned a group leader, in their case, Sun-young, whose father held a position in the Ministry of State Security. The group leader's responsibility was clear: observe and report any signs of ideological wavering, any expression of doubt, any hint of contact with the outside world. Beyond approved customer interactions, they were to monitor each other's conversations, note any changes in mood or behavior, and document everything in daily reports submitted to Manager Kong, the restaurant's political officer. Manager Kong himself was a 52-year-old career apparatchik, whose thin frame and penetrating gaze seemed designed to inspire unease. He conducted mandatory self-criticism sessions every evening after the restaurant closed, typically beginning around 11 p.m. and lasting until 1 or 2 in the morning. During these sessions, each woman was required to confess her shortcomings, acknowledge her ideological deficiencies, and pledge renewed devotion to the party and the Supreme Leader. The sessions followed a predictable pattern. Yet they never became routine. There was always the underlying tension. The fear that one's confession might not be deemed sufficiently sincere. That a moment's hesitation might be interpreted as political doubt. Comrade Yeonhee, Manager Kong would say, his voice carrying a tone of weary disappointment. Your smile during the evening service appeared mechanical. A genuine servant of the Republic radiates natural joy in her work. This suggests a disconnection between your outward behavior and your inner revolutionary consciousness. Explain this discrepancy. These interrogations could last for hours, with other women expected to contribute their own observations and criticisms. It was a system designed to prevent the formation of genuine bonds, to ensure that trust was always conditional, always subject to the demands of ideological purity. Yeonhee learned to measure her words carefully, to craft confessions that acknowledged minor failings, while demonstrating fundamental loyalty, to navigate the treacherous space between excessive self-criticism and insufficient contrition. The daily routine was exhausting. They woke at 6 a.m. for morning exercises and ideological study, reviewing speeches by the supreme leader, and studying approved newspapers from Pyongyang that were delivered weekly through diplomatic channels. Breakfast was communal and monitored. Even casual conversation required vigilance, as any comment could be misconstrued and reported. By 9 a.m., they began preparing the restaurant for service, which officially started at 11 and continued until 10 p.m. During service hours, they were expected to be ceaselessly attentive, anticipating customers' needs, performing their choreographed songs and dances during designated entertainment segments, and maintaining the fiction that they were the happiest workers in all of Asia. Yeonhee found herself becoming two people: the public persona, who smiled brilliantly while serving kimchi, jjigae and naengmyeon to curious tourists and expatriates, and the private self, who felt increasingly hollow, increasingly aware of the performance nature of her existence. She had been raised to believe that serving the Republic in this capacity was a privilege, that every dollar earned was a contribution to the sacred cause of building a powerful and prosperous nation. Her father had been so proud when she received the assignment, had spoken of it as validation of their family's 3 generations of loyalty. But the reality was different from what she had imagined. The work was physically demanding, 10-hour shifts that often extended longer, standing in high heels on hard floors, maintaining a perfect posture, and unflagging cheerfulness, regardless of how rude or demanding a customer might be. The mental strain was worse. Every interaction had to be calibrated, every response measured against potential political implications. When customers asked about life in North Korea, she delivered the approved responses about universal healthcare, free education, and the love the Korean people bore for their leader. When they inquired about news reports of human rights abuses or nuclear weapons development, she deflected with practiced ease, suggesting that such reports were Western propaganda designed to justify imperialist aggression. The nightly self-criticism sessions gradually wore away at her psychological defenses. Initially, she could participate with a sense of performing a necessary ritual. But as weeks turned into months, something shifted. She found herself lying awake after these sessions, staring at the ceiling of the cramped room, listening to Sun-young's steady breathing and Mi-young's occasional sleep-talking, and wondering what her life had become. The phrases they were required to repeat. I am nothing, the party is everything, individual happiness is achieved through collective sacrifice. The Supreme Leader's wisdom guides my every action, began to feel not just hollow but actively oppressive. In May 2016, 2 months into her assignment, Yeonhee experienced her first genuine moment of doubt. A European tourist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, had asked her a simple question. Do you enjoy working here? Are you happy? The approved response was automatic. "I am honored to serve my country and bring glory to our supreme leader through my work." But something in the woman's expression, a flash of sadness or pity, penetrated Yeonhee's defenses. For just a moment, she wondered what it would be like to answer honestly. To say that she was tired, that she missed her family, that the constant surveillance and political pressure were suffocating, that she dreamed of a life where her thoughts could be her own. The moment passed, of course. The European woman thanked her politely and returned to her meal. But the crack in Yeonhee's ideological armor had formed. She became more attentive to the conversations around her, listening to customers discuss their lives with a new intensity. They spoke so casually about choices, which restaurant to visit, which movie to watch, whether to take a trip to the beach or the mountains. These mundane decisions represented a freedom she had never experienced, a life where one's time and choices were one's own. Everything changed on a humid evening in early August 2016. The restaurant was moderately busy, perhaps 40 customers scattered across the dining room. Yeonhee was serving a table of Chinese businessmen when she noticed a new customer being seated at a corner table, a Korean man. Perhaps in his early 30s, well dressed in casual business attire, dining alone. Something about him was different. He lacked the tourist's curiosity or the expatriate's weary familiarity. He studied the menu with genuine interest, ordered in fluent Korean with a distinctly South Korean accent. When Yeonhee approached to take his order, he looked directly at her, a look that made her profoundly uncomfortable. "Good evening," he said quietly. "My name is Ji-hoon. I'm from Seoul." The admission was startling in its directness. Most South Korean visitors, aware of the political sensitivities, avoided identifying themselves so explicitly. Yeonhee maintained her professional composure, though her heart was racing. Contact with South Koreans was not forbidden. They were customers like any other, but it required special vigilance. "Welcome to Pyongyang restaurant," she responded in her practiced service voice. "I hope you'll enjoy our authentic North Korean cuisine." Ji-hoon ordered bibimbap and a bottle of Taedonggang beer, the North Korean brand the restaurant imported at considerable expense. As Yeonhee prepared to leave, he added, almost as an afterthought, "You perform your role very well. But I wonder if you ever think about what your life might be like if you were free to choose your own path." The words hit her like a physical blow. She felt her carefully maintained composure slip for just a fraction of a second before recovering. "I am free," she said firmly, delivering the approved response. "The Democratic People's Republic provides education, healthcare, and meaningful work to all its citizens. I have chosen to serve my country." Ji-hoon nodded slowly, his expression neutral. "Of course. I apologize if my question was inappropriate. I'll look forward to the meal." Yeonhee retreated to the kitchen, her hands trembling slightly as she entered Ji-hoon's order. The interaction had lasted less than 2 minutes, but it had shaken something loose inside her. The question, if you were free to choose your own path, echoed in her mind throughout the rest of her shift. During the evening's entertainment segment, when she and the other servers performed a choreographed dance to revolutionary songs, she found herself distracted, going through the motions mechanically while her thoughts churned. That night's self-criticism session was particularly brutal. Manager Kong had somehow learned of her interaction with the South Korean customer, likely through Sun-young, who had been observing from across the dining room. "Comrade Yeonhee," he began, his voice heavy with disappointment, "you engaged in an extended conversation with a South Korean agent provocateur. Your body language suggested uncertainty, perhaps even receptiveness to his ideological contamination. This is a serious matter." Yeonhee defended herself as best she could, insisting that she had maintained proper ideological boundaries, that she had rejected the South Koreans' implicit criticism of the Republic. The session lasted until 3 a.m., with other workers required to dissect her behavior and identify her failings. By the time she was finally allowed to return to her room, she was physically and emotionally exhausted. Yet sleep would not come. Ji-hoon's question continued to echo, "What might your life be like if you were free to choose?" Ji-hoon returned to the restaurant 3 days later. And then again, a week after that. Each visit followed the same pattern. He would order quietly, eat his meal, and occasionally engage Yeonhee in brief conversation if she happened to be serving his table. He never said anything overtly political or challenging, but his presence itself was unsettling. He represented something Yeonhee had been taught to fear and despise: the capitalist South, the puppet regime, the corrupted half of the divided nation. Yet he seemed neither corrupt nor threatening. He was polite, thoughtful, and somehow sad in a way she couldn't quite articulate. During his 4th visit, in late August, Ji-hoon mentioned almost casually that he worked for an NGO focused on inter-Korean cultural exchange. "I come to restaurants like this," he explained. When Yeonhee asked about his work, "Because I believe in the importance of human connection across political divides. The governments may be enemies, but ordinary people don't have to be." The comment stayed with Yeonhee. She had been taught that South Koreans lived in misery under American imperial domination. That they desperately longed for reunification under the North's leadership. Yet Ji-hoon spoke of governments as separate from people, of political systems as constructs that could be questioned rather than eternal truths. It was a perspective she had never been permitted to consider. In early September 2016, Ji-hoon's visits became more frequent, sometimes twice a week. Yeonhee realized she was beginning to anticipate them, scanning the dining room when she arrived for her shift to see if he was there. Their conversations remained carefully bounded by professional propriety and political caution, yet something was developing beneath the surface. She found herself thinking about the questions he raised, about the implicit contrast between his obvious freedom of movement and choice and her own constrained existence. The turning point came on a September evening when the restaurant was unusually quiet. Ji-hoon was dining alone, and manager Kong had stepped out briefly to deal with a supplier issue. Taking a calculated risk, Yeonhee approached Ji-hoon's table under the pretense of refilling his water glass. "Why do you keep coming here?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Ji-hoon looked up at her, his expression serious. "Because I see you, Yeonhee. Not the performance, not the propaganda you. And I think you're exhausted. I think you're suffocating under the weight of all that you're required to be and say, and do. I think a part of you knows there's a different way to live." Tears threatened to spill from Yeonhee's eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. "You don't understand," she said. "My family, if I even think what you're suggesting." "I understand more than you know," Ji-hoon interrupted gently. "I help people who want to leave. I can't force you to make any decision. But I want you to know that if you ever want a different life, if you ever want to be free to choose your own path, to love who you want, to think your own thoughts without fear, there are people who will help you. I will help you." Before Yeonhee could respond, she heard footsteps approaching. Manager Kong was returning. She straightened immediately, her professional mask snapping back into place, and moved on to the next table as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened. The seed had been planted. The possibility of freedom, once acknowledged, could not be unthought. Over the following weeks, Yeonhee wrestled with an impossible choice. Ji-hoon's words had awakened something in her, a desperate longing for a life where she wasn't constantly performing, constantly monitored, constantly afraid. She began to notice things she had trained herself to overlook: the way Sun-young watched her with barely concealed suspicion. The mechanical nature of the nightly self-criticism sessions, the hollow feeling that accompanied every smile she forced for the cameras and customers. She thought about her family constantly. Her father, so proud of her selection for this assignment. Her mother, who had wept with joy when Yeonhee was chosen. Her younger brother, still in school in Pyongyang, whose future opportunities would be shaped by her own record of loyalty and service. In North Korea's system of collective punishment, her actions would have consequences not just for herself but for 3 generations of her family. Yet the suffocation was becoming unbearable. The constant surveillance, the nightly ideological sessions, the awareness that every word, every expression, every moment was being evaluated for signs of disloyalty, it was crushing her spirit. She found herself wondering if this was really life, or merely existence. She thought about Ji-hoon's question, what might her life be like if she were free to choose? And realized with startling clarity that she had never, not once in her 24 years, made a significant choice about her own life. Her education, her career, her daily schedule, even her thoughts and words all had been dictated by the needs of the state. One night in late October 2016, lying awake after yet another brutal self-criticism session that had lasted until 2 a.m., Yeonhee made her decision. She didn't know exactly how it would happen or what would be required of her. But she knew, with a certainty that both terrified and liberated her, that she could not continue living this way. She would seek Ji-hoon's help. She would attempt the impossible. She would try to be free. The path ahead would be dangerous, perhaps fatal. Success would mean betraying everything she had been taught to value, abandoning her family to unknown consequences, and becoming what she had been trained to despise, a defector, a traitor. But the alternative, continuing to live as a carefully programmed automaton. Sacrificing her selfhood on the altar of an ideology that demanded everything and gave nothing in return, had become unthinkable. As dawn light began to filter through the window of her cramped room, Yeonhee felt something she had not experienced in months' hope. It was fragile and frightening, tinged with guilt and fear, but it was real. The seed Ji-hoon had planted was growing, and there would be no turning back. The journey toward freedom had begun. The morning after Yeonhee made her decision, she woke with a mixture of terror and determination coursing through her veins. The October sun was already heating the cramped third-floor room, and she could hear Seung stirring in the adjacent sleeping space. Everything looked the same: the faded floral curtains, the small wooden dresser they shared, the propaganda poster on the wall proclaiming, "Our future is guaranteed by the great leader," yet everything had fundamentally changed. She had crossed an invisible line in her mind, and there would be no crossing back. The challenge now was operational: how to communicate her decision to Ji-hoon without alerting the omnipresent surveillance apparatus that governed every aspect of her life. Manager Kong maintained meticulous records of all customer interactions, particularly with foreign nationals. The restaurant's security cameras captured every angle of the dining room, though mercifully, they did not extend to the kitchen or storage areas. Phone calls were forbidden, and their movements outside the restaurant were strictly controlled and always supervised. Even on their rare days off, one Sunday per month, they were required to move as a group, with a designated minder, ensuring no one strayed from approved activities. Yeonhee understood that any escape attempt would require meticulous planning, absolute secrecy, and perfect timing. A single mistake, a moment's carelessness, could result not only in her own imprisonment but in devastating consequences for her family back in Pyongyang. The regime's system of guilt by association meant her parents and younger brother would face interrogation, possible imprisonment, and certainly the destruction of their social standing. The weight of this knowledge pressed upon her constantly, yet the alternative, continuing to live as a prisoner of ideology, had become unbearable. Ji-hoon did not visit the restaurant for nearly 2 weeks after their whispered conversation. Yeonhee found herself oscillating between relief and anxiety. Perhaps he had reconsidered his offer, decided she was too risky, too compromised by her background and training. Perhaps the entire interaction had been some elaborate security test orchestrated by Manager Kang. North Korean security services were famous for their elaborate provocations, creating opportunities for disloyalty precisely to identify and eliminate potential defectors before they could act. On November 7, 2016, Ji-hoon returned. The restaurant was experiencing its usual Tuesday evening lull, with only about a dozen customers scattered across the dining room. Yeonhee was assigned to the western section, which included Ji-hoon's preferred corner table. Her heart hammered in her chest as she approached with the menu, forcing her expression into the practiced smile of professional hospitality. "Good evening, sir," she said in Korean, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "Welcome back to Pyongyang restaurant." Ji-hoon looked up at her, his expression neutral but his eyes conveying something deeper, understanding, perhaps, or recognition. "Thank you," he said simply. "I'll have the Pyongyang naengmyeon and a bottle of Taedonggang beer, please." As Yeonhee wrote down the order, Ji-hoon set his menu down on the table. When she reached to collect it, she felt something beneath, a small piece of paper, folded tightly. Her fingers closed around it instinctively, palming it with a practiced motion that surprised her with its smoothness. She had never done anything like this before, yet her body seemed to understand the necessity of appearing natural, unremarkable. "I'll bring your order shortly," she said, her voice betraying none of the turmoil churning inside her. The next 20 minutes were agonizing. Yeonhee moved through her duties mechanically, the small piece of paper burning against her palm. Where she had tucked it into the waistband of her traditional hanbok skirt. She delivered Ji-hoon's meal, refilled water glasses at other tables, and smiled automatically at customers. While her mind raced through scenarios of discovery and consequence. Manager Kang was in his office reviewing accounts, but he could emerge at any moment. Sun-young was working the eastern section but kept glancing in her direction with what might have been suspicion or might have been simple curiosity. Finally, around 8:30 p.m., Yeonhee saw her opportunity. The restaurant had a small storage room adjacent to the women's restroom on the second floor, used for extra linens and supplies. It was one of the few spaces not covered by security cameras. She excused herself from the dining floor, claiming she needed to replenish table napkins, and slipped into the storage room, closing the door behind her. With trembling fingers, she unfolded the small piece of paper. Ji-hoon's handwriting was neat and compact. "I understand the weight of what you're considering. I will not contact you again unless you signal that you want my help. If you do tomorrow night, if you can safely serve my table, bring me the check folded with the receipt facing outward. That will tell me you're ready to begin planning. If you cannot do this, I will understand and respect your decision. Whatever you choose, know that your life has value beyond what any ideology can measure. J. Yeonhee read the note 3 times, committing every word to memory, then tore it into tiny pieces and flushed them down the restroom toilet. She washed her hands slowly, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger. Eyes wide with fear and determination, face flushed, the carefully maintained mask of cheerful service temporarily abandoned. Who was she really? The loyal daughter of the party. Trained from childhood to sublimate her individual desires to collective good? Or someone else entirely, someone who wanted the simple freedom to choose her own path? Ji-hoon returned the following evening, Wednesday, November 8, 2016. Yeonhee had barely slept the previous night, lying awake beside her roommates and wrestling with the enormity of her decision. She thought about her father, who had served the party faithfully for 30 years, who had wept with pride when she was selected for this overseas assignment. She thought about her mother's gentle hands braiding her hair when she was a child, her brother's laughter during their rare family gatherings. She thought about everything she would be sacrificing, everyone she would be betraying. But she also thought about the nightly self-criticism sessions that stripped away her dignity piece by piece. The constant surveillance meant she could never truly relax, never truly be herself. The suffocating awareness that her thoughts, her words, her very existence were not her own but belonged to the state. The mechanical nature of her daily performances, the hollowness of her scripted smiles, and the choreographed happiness. When Ji-hoon's order came up in the kitchen, Yeonhee took a deep breath, steadying herself. This was the moment. Once she folded that check with the receipt facing outward, there would be no ambiguity, no plausible deniability. She would have committed herself to a course of action that could end in freedom or death, with very little middle ground. She approached his table with the check folder, her hands remarkably steady. As she set it down, she had folded it exactly as Ji-hoon had specified, receipt facing outward. Their eyes met for just a fraction of a second, and she saw him give the smallest of nods, acknowledgement received. "Thank you for dining with us this evening," she said in her professional voice, the words carrying none of the emotional weight of what had just transpired. "The meal was excellent, as always," Ji-hoon replied, his tone equally neutral. But as he opened the check folder to pay, he placed his business card on the table. A gesture that might seem innocent. Many customers left business cards for the restaurant's records. Yeonhee collected it along with his payment, her heart pounding. The business card was legitimate: Ji-hoon Kim, Associate Director, Korea Culture Exchange Foundation, with an address in Seoul and contact information. But written on the back in tiny script was a single line: "Tomorrow 9 p.m. customer restroom, paper under soap dispenser." The next evening, Yeonhee's shift felt interminable. She moved through her duties in a fog of anxiety. Constantly aware of the surveillance cameras, of Sun-young's watchful presence, of Manager Kong emerging periodically from his office to observe the staff. At 8:55 p.m., she requested permission to use the restroom, a request that was routinely granted, as servers were only human and shifts were long. The customer restroom on the first floor was a single occupancy room, mercifully free of cameras for obvious privacy reasons. Yeonhee locked the door behind her, then lifted the wall-mounted soap dispenser with shaking hands. Beneath it, secured with a small piece of tape, was a folded piece of paper smaller than her palm. She memorized the contents quickly. "We will communicate this way. Messages under the soap dispenser. Check daily when possible. I am working with a network that has successfully helped others escape. The route Phnom Penh to the Thai border by car, then to Bangkok, then to Seoul via the South Korean embassy. Timeline 6 to 8 weeks to arrange everything safely. Requirements: you must identify a day when you'll have legitimate excuse to leave the restaurant alone, even briefly. A medical emergency is best covered. We will create the opportunity when you're ready. Destroy this note. Next message in 3 days. J. Yeonhee read it twice more, committing every detail to memory, then tore the note into pieces so small they were nearly powder, flushing them away. She washed her hands, splashed cold water on her face, and studied her reflection again. Her face was flushed but otherwise composed. She could do this. She had to do this. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Every 3 to 4 days, a new message would appear under the soap dispenser in the customer restroom. Ji-hoon visited the restaurant regularly, not so frequently as to raise suspicion, but often enough to maintain the fiction of being a regular customer who appreciated North Korean cuisine. They never spoke beyond the standard customer-server exchanges, yet an entire clandestine conversation was unfolding through their hidden notes. The messages were masterpieces of concise communication. Ji-hoon provided details about the escape network, a loose coalition of activists. former defectors, and humanitarian workers who specialized in facilitating escapes from North Korean overseas workers. He explained that Cambodia's relatively porous border with Thailand made it a preferred escape route. Far safer than attempting to defect through China or Mongolia. He detailed the documentation they were preparing: forged travel papers, emergency contact numbers, safe houses along the route. Yeonhee, in turn, provided information about the restaurant's security protocols. The staff rotation schedules, the monthly medical checkups they received at a local clinic, and manager Kang's behavioral patterns. She wrote in tiny script on scraps of paper torn from the margins of inventory forms. Hiding her notes in the same location under the soap dispenser where Ji-hoon would retrieve them during his visits. Somewhere during this dangerous correspondence, Yeonhee's feelings toward Ji-hoon began to shift and deepen. Initially, she had viewed him purely as a facilitator, a means to an end, someone who could help her escape the suffocating confines of her existence. But his messages revealed a man of remarkable courage and compassion. He was risking his own safety. South Korean citizens who facilitated defections could face legal complications. And the North Korean security services were known to target such activists to help a stranger pursue freedom. His notes, while necessarily brief and focused on operational details, occasionally included small personal touches. Once, after Yeonhee had mentioned in a note that she was exhausted from a particularly brutal self-criticism session. His next message included a single line: "Your exhaustion is not weakness. It is your humanity asserting itself against a system designed to crush it. Hold on." Another time, when she expressed fear about the consequences for her family, he wrote, "The burden of guilt is how they control you. Your family would want you to live, truly live. No parent's love comes with chains." The words had made her weep silently in the restroom stall, tears streaming down her face as she struggled to maintain her composure. By late November 2016, Yeonhee realized she had fallen in love with Ji-hoon, not just with the idea of freedom he represented, but with the man himself. She loved his courage, his careful planning, the way he seemed to understand her inner turmoil without judgment. She loved that he never pressured her, never demanded commitment, always emphasized that the decision was hers alone. In a life where she had never been permitted to make meaningful choices, this respect for her autonomy was profoundly moving. She wondered what he looked like when he wasn't performing the role of casual restaurant customer. Did he smile easily? What did his apartment in Seoul look like? What music did he enjoy? What books did he read? What made him laugh? She knew so little about him, really, yet felt connected to him in a way she had never experienced with anyone else. One evening in early December, she included a personal note along with the operational information he had requested. "I think about what it would be like to have a conversation with you. Where we don't have to measure every word, where we can simply talk as two people. I imagine having coffee together, or walking in a park, or discussing something trivial like the weather, without fear. Is that what freedom feels like?" His response came 3 days later: "Freedom feels like breathing deeply after holding your breath for so long you forgot what oxygen tasted like. It feels like discovering that the world is larger and more complex than you were taught, that goodness and cruelty exist everywhere, that humans are messy and complicated and beautiful. It feels like being scared and uncertain, but knowing that the fear is yours, the uncertainty is yours, and the choices are yours. And yes, it feels like having coffee with someone you care about and discussing absolutely nothing important. I look forward to that coffee." Yeonhee. By mid-December 2016, the escape plan was taking concrete shape. Ji-hoon's network had established contact with a doctor at the medical clinic where the restaurant workers received their monthly checkups. This doctor, a Cambodian national sympathetic to the plight of North Korean workers, had agreed to provide a medical pretext for Yeonhee to leave the restaurant on her own, a specialized examination requiring travel to a hospital across the city, too complex to be handled at the routine clinic. The plan was intricate and dependent on precise timing. Yeonhee would report symptoms suggesting appendicitis during her next scheduled medical checkup in early January 2017. The sympathetic doctor would confirm the need for additional examination at a larger hospital, writing a referral that would satisfy Manager Kang's scrutiny. An ambulance, actually a vehicle provided by the escape network, would arrive to transport her. Once away from the restaurant, she would be driven directly to the Thai border, a journey of approximately 3 hours. Meanwhile, Ji-hoon's network was preparing everything else: safe houses in Bangkok, contact with the South Korean embassy, forged documents that would allow her to pass through Thai immigration, and secure communication channels to coordinate the operation in real time. The messages under the soap dispenser became more detailed, covering every conceivable contingency. What if Manager Kang insisted on accompanying her to the hospital? The ambulance crew would have prepared objections based on medical protocols. What if the other workers became suspicious? Yeonhee would begin mentioning minor abdominal discomfort weeks in advance, creating a medical narrative. What if North Korean security services were somehow alerted? Ji-hoon had contacts within South Korean intelligence who would be monitoring and could provide emergency intervention if necessary. On December 20, 2016, Ji-hoon left a message that was both operational and deeply personal. "We are ready when you are. Everything is in place. January 12 is the next available window. Your scheduled medical checkup is January 11, so symptoms reported then would justify emergency transport on the 12th. But Yeonhee, you need to be certain. Once we begin, there is no stopping midway. You will lose everything familiar, everyone you love. The freedom you gain comes at a terrible price. I need you to be sure. Take a week to decide. If you're ready, leave me confirmation under the dispenser. If you're not, simply don't respond, and I will understand. No judgment, no disappointment. This has to be your choice, freely made." Yeonhee spent the next week in a state of tortured contemplation. The December holiday season meant increased business at the restaurant. Many expatriates and tourists sought exotic dining experiences during the festive period, which meant longer hours and more intense scrutiny from Manager Kang. The nightly self-criticism sessions became even more rigorous, with special emphasis on maintaining proper revolutionary consciousness during the corrupting influence of Western holiday celebrations. On Christmas Eve, a particularly brutal session lasted until nearly 4 a.m. Manager Kang had discovered that one of the workers, a young woman named Hye-jin, had accepted a small decorative ornament from a customer, a miniature Christmas tree, harmless and cheerful. This transgression became the focus of hours of ideological interrogation. Why had she accepted a symbol of Western religious celebration? Did she not understand that such symbols represented spiritual colonialism? Did her action not suggest dangerous openness to ideological contamination? Watching Hye-jin's tearful self-abasement, seeing her reduced to a trembling, sobbing figure, begging forgiveness for the crime of accepting a small kindness from a stranger, Yeonhee felt something crystallize inside her. This was not normal. This was not healthy. This was not a system worth preserving or serving. Whatever guilt she might carry for abandoning her family, whatever hardships awaited her in the unknown future, they could not be worse than this systematic destruction of human dignity. On December 27, 2016, Yeonhee left her final message under the soap dispenser: "I am ready. January 12. Whatever comes, I choose freedom. I choose life. I choose the possibility of that coffee conversation with you. Thank you for seeing me as a person, not just a propaganda tool or an ideological statement. Thank you for believing I deserve more than this. I'll be ready." Why? Ji-hoon's final pre-operation message came 2 days later. Your courage humbles me. From this moment forward, every detail matters. Begin mentioning mild abdominal discomfort to your roommates. Not dramatic, just occasional mentions. At your January 11th checkup, describe symptoms consistent with appendicitis, pain in the lower right abdomen, nausea, loss of appetite. The doctor knows what to look for. On January 12th, when the ambulance arrives, bring nothing. No photos, no mementos, no personal items that would suggest planned departure. You will be leaving your entire life behind. But you will also be stepping into a new one. I will be there at the end of this journey. We will have that coffee. We will discuss the weather. We will be free. Stay strong. J. Yeonhee memorized the message, destroyed it, and returned to the dining floor. Her hands were steady now, her resolve firm. In 2 weeks, she would either be free or dead. There was a strange peace in the certainty. The dance of secret communication was complete. Now came the most dangerous part, the escape itself. The days between December 27, 2016, and January 11, 2017, passed with excruciating slowness. Yeonhee moved through her routines with mechanical precision, every action calculated, every word measured. She had become an actress playing the role of someone who had no plans beyond serving the next customer, attending the next self-criticism session. Waking up to repeat the same carefully monitored existence tomorrow and the day after. But beneath the surface, she was methodically building the narrative that would make her escape possible. On December 29, during the evening meal with her roommates, she casually mentioned feeling slightly nauseous. I think I ate something that didn't agree with me, she said, pressing her hand to her stomach. Sun-young looked up from her rice bowl with immediate suspicion, but Mi-young merely nodded sympathetically. There's been some kind of stomach illness going around, Mi-young offered. Haejin mentioned feeling unwell last week, too. Over the following days, Yeonhee carefully calibrated her symptoms. Not dramatic enough to warrant immediate medical attention that would disrupt the timeline, but consistent enough to establish a pattern. On January 2, 2017, she left half her breakfast uneaten, claiming loss of appetite. On January 5, she mentioned to manager Kang that she had been experiencing occasional sharp pains in her lower abdomen, but assured him it was nothing serious, probably just stress or dietary adjustment. Manager Kang's response was predictably bureaucratic. If you're experiencing health issues, Comrade Yeonhee, you must report them properly. Our workers' health reflects on the Republic's commitment to its citizens' well-being. Your scheduled medical checkup is in 6 days. Make sure to describe your symptoms accurately to the doctor. Of course, Manager Kang, Yeonhee replied, bowing slightly. I'm sure it's nothing serious, but I'll mention it during the checkup. Ji-hoon visited the restaurant twice during this waiting period, but they did not exchange messages. The operational plan was set further communication risked exposure. Instead, they played their roles flawlessly, customer and server, nothing more. Yet when their eyes met briefly as she delivered his order on January 8, Yeonhee saw encouragement there, a silent promise that everything was proceeding as planned. The nights were the hardest. Lying in the darkness between Sun-young and Mi-young, listening to their breathing, Yeonhee battled waves of guilt and terror. She thought about her mother's face, the way she had embraced Yeonhee before her departure to Cambodia, whispering, "Make us proud, my daughter. Serve our nation well." She thought about her father's tears of joy at her selection for overseas duty. She thought about her younger brother, only 16 years old, whose future would be destroyed by her defection. In North Korea's system of collective punishment, her family would face immediate investigation. Her father would be removed from his party position, subjected to intensive interrogation about how he had failed to properly educate his daughter. Her mother would lose her job. Her brother would be barred from university, his social classification permanently downgraded to hostile class. They might face imprisonment, or at minimum, decades of social ostracism and economic hardship. The weight of this knowledge was crushing. More than once, Yeonhee considered abandoning the plan entirely, sending a final message to Ji-hoon that she couldn't go through with it. But then she would attend another self-criticism session, endure another hour of Manager Kang's ideological interrogation, feel again the suffocating sensation of existing as a puppet, whose strings were controlled entirely by the state, and her resolve would harden once more. On the evening of January 10, the night before her scheduled medical checkup, Yeonhee allowed herself one small act of sentimentality. She wrote a letter to her family not to send, but simply to express what she could never tell them directly. She wrote in tiny script on a napkin during a quiet moment in the storage room. Dearest Oma, Appa, and little brother, by the time anyone reads this, if anyone ever does, I will be gone. Please know that I loved you all. Please know that my choice was not a rejection of you, but a desperate grasp at something I cannot fully explain, the right to exist as myself, not as a tool of ideology. I am so sorry for the pain and hardship my decision will cause you. If there is any way to ease your suffering, I would take it. But there isn't. This system we serve demands total sacrifice of self, and I can no longer give it. I hope someday you might understand, might even forgive me. I will carry you in my heart always. Your daughter and sister, Yeonhee. She read the letter once, tears streaming silently down her face, then tore it into microscopic pieces and flushed it away. There could be no evidence, no trail, no hint of premeditation. January 11, 2017, dawned humid and overcast, typical for Cambodia's dry season. The monthly medical checkups were conducted at a small clinic approximately 15 minutes' drive from the restaurant. Operated by a Cambodian doctor who had a contract with various embassies and diplomatic missions to provide health care for foreign workers. The restaurant workers were transported in a small van, always accompanied by Manager Kang or his deputy. Yeonhee's group 6 women, including herself, departed at 9 a.m. During the drive, she rehearsed her symptoms in her mind. The sympathetic doctor would be expecting her, would know what signs to look for, but she needed to perform her role convincingly enough that Manager Kang, who sat in the front passenger seat reviewing paperwork, would not suspect anything unusual. The clinic was modest but clean, with pale green walls and the antiseptic smell common to medical facilities worldwide. The workers were processed efficiently: height, weight, blood pressure, and basic physical examination. When Yeonhee's turn came, she was ushered into an examination room where Drive Sofik, a middle-aged Cambodian man with gentle eyes and graying hair, greeted her in adequate Korean. Good morning, miss. Please, sit down. How are you feeling today? Yeonhee had met Drive Sofik during previous checkups, but this was the first time she knew he was part of the network helping her escape. She forced herself to remain calm, to show nothing beyond the symptoms she was supposed to be experiencing. Doctor, I've been having some stomach problems for the past 2 weeks, she began, her hand instinctively moving to her lower right abdomen. Sharp pains here, and I've lost my appetite. Sometimes I feel nauseous. Dr. Sofik's expression became professionally concerned. He asked detailed questions about the pain's location, intensity, and duration. He conducted a physical examination, pressing gently on her abdomen in specific locations, asking her to indicate when and where it hurt. Yeonhee responded according to the symptoms of appendicitis that Ji-hoon's messages had described weeks earlier. After several minutes of examination, Drive Sofik sat back, his expression grave. Miss Yeonhee, I'm concerned about your symptoms. They're consistent with possible appendicitis, which can be very serious if left untreated. I need to refer you to Calmet Hospital for additional imaging and specialist evaluation. This needs to be done today. Appendicitis can progress rapidly. Yeonhee allowed genuine fear to show on her face. Is it dangerous, doctor? It can be, if not properly treated. Drive. Sofik replied. But the hospital has excellent facilities. I'm going to write a referral now and arrange for transport. You should go directly there. The next 20 minutes unfolded exactly as Ji-hoon had predicted. Doctor. Sofik spoke with Manager Kong, showing him the written referral and explaining in a mixture of Korean and English that immediate specialist evaluation was medically necessary. Manager Kang's expression cycled through suspicion, concern, and bureaucratic calculation. A serious medical incident involving one of his workers would reflect poorly on his management, but failing to provide necessary medical care would be worse. I will accompany her to the hospital, Manager Kong finally declared. Doctor. Sofik shook his head firmly. The ambulance I've called can only accommodate the patient and medical personnel. Hospital policy. But you're welcome to follow in your own vehicle. I'm sending my medical report ahead. They'll be expecting her. Manager Kong hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with allowing Yeonhee to travel alone, even in an ambulance. But the doctor's explanation seemed reasonable, and refusing medical care for a potentially serious condition would be difficult to justify in his reports to Pyongyang. Very well, he said finally. But Comrade Yeonhee, you will go directly to the hospital and remain there until I arrive. You will not speak to anyone unnecessarily. Do you understand? Yes, Manager Kong, Yeonhee replied, her voice small and frightened. She was not acting now. The terror was genuine, though not for the reasons Manager Kong assumed. The ambulance arrived 15 minutes later. It was unmarked, a white van that could have belonged to any medical service. The driver and a female nurse helped Yeonhee into the back. As the doors closed and the vehicle pulled away from the clinic, Yeonhee watched through the small rear window as Manager Kong rushed to the van that had brought them, clearly intending to follow. But the ambulance driver, a thin Cambodian man whose eyes met Yeonhee's in the rearview mirror with reassuring calm, immediately navigated into Phnom Penh's chaotic morning traffic. Within minutes, they had made several quick turns, weaving between tuk-tuks and motorcycles, and Manager Kang's van was no longer visible behind them. You're safe now, the female nurse said in Korean, her accent marking her as South Korean. My name is Minji. I'm part of the network helping you. We're not going to any hospital. We're going directly to the Thai border. The drive will take about 3 hours. You should try to rest. The words should have brought relief, but instead, Yeonhee felt a wave of panic so intense she thought she might vomit. This was it. The point of no return. In the next few hours, Manager Kong would arrive at Calmet Hospital, discover she was never admitted, and realize she had defected. The North Korean security services would be alerted immediately. Her family would be arrested and interrogated, probably within hours. Everything she had known, everyone she had loved, was now irretrievably in the past. I need you to breathe slowly, Minji said, recognizing the signs of a panic attack. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Focus on my voice. You're doing something incredibly brave. The hardest part is starting, and you've already started. Now we just need to keep moving forward. The ambulance traveled west from Phnom Penh, leaving the capital's urban sprawl behind and entering Cambodia's rural landscape. Rice paddies stretched to the horizon on both sides of the highway, interrupted occasionally by small villages of traditional wooden houses on stilts. Water buffalo grazed in flooded fields, and farmers in conical hats worked under the climbing sun. It was beautiful in a way Yeonhee had never fully appreciated during her monitored excursions outside the restaurant. She had always been too focused on maintaining proper revolutionary consciousness to simply observe and absorb the world around her. After about 90 minutes, they left the main highway, turning onto progressively smaller roads. The driver explained that they were avoiding the main border crossings, which would have Thai immigration procedures and potential complications. Instead, they were heading toward a more remote section of the border where the network had arrangements with local contacts. "What about Ji-hoon?" Yeonhee asked suddenly. "Where is he?" Min-ji smiled. "He's already in Bangkok, preparing for your arrival. He wanted to be part of the extraction team, but it's safer this way." South Korean nationals crossing borders multiple times attract attention. "He'll meet you at the safe house tonight." The landscape became more rugged as they approached the border region. Forested hills rose on both sides of the narrow road, and the humidity intensified. Yeonhee could see storm clouds gathering in the distance. The dry season occasionally produced sudden, violent thunderstorms. At approximately 1 p.m., they reached a small village that seemed to consist of perhaps 20 houses scattered along a dirt road. The ambulance pulled into a compound behind a slightly larger house, and a Cambodian man in his 50s emerged. Greeting the driver in Khmer before switching to broken English for Yeonhee's benefit. "Welcome. No worry. We help many people. You're safe here." They had arrived at what was essentially a safe house on the Cambodian side of the border. The man, whose name Yeonhee never learned, brought them food: rice with vegetables and chicken, simple but delicious. Yeonhee discovered she was ravenously hungry, having been too nervous to eat breakfast. As she ate, Min-ji explained the next phase. "We'll wait here until around 4 p.m., then cross the border on foot. It's about a 2-kilometer walk through forested area, not difficult terrain, but we need to be quiet and careful. On the Thai side, there will be another vehicle waiting to take us to Bangkok. The whole thing should take less than an hour." Those 3 hours of waiting were among the longest of Yeonhee's life. She tried to rest but couldn't sleep, her mind churning with fears and regrets and desperate hopes. She thought about her roommates discovering her absence, the chaos that would ensue at the restaurant manager. Kang's fury and panic as he reported the defection to his superiors in Pyongyang. She thought about her father opening his door to find state security officers there to arrest him. She thought about her mother's tears and her brother's confusion and fear. But she also thought about Ji-hoon waiting for her in Bangkok, about the promise of a life where she could choose her own path. Think her own thoughts, love freely without fear. She thought about the simple luxury Ji-hoon had described, having coffee together and discussing nothing important. That image had become totemic for her, representing everything she was risking so much to achieve. At 3:45 p.m., their Cambodian host returned. "Time goes. The weather is good now, but rain is coming tonight. Better cross now." They left through the back of the compound, following a narrow trail that led into dense forest. The Cambodian man led the way, moving with the confidence of someone who had made this journey many times. Min-ji stayed close to Yeonhee, occasionally offering a steadying hand when the trail became steep or muddy. The forest was alive with sounds: birds calling, insects humming, the rustle of small animals in the undergrowth. The air was thick and humid, laden with the scent of vegetation and earth. Yeonhee's traditional Korean work shoes, flat slippers designed for restaurant service, were completely inadequate for jungle trekking. And within minutes, her feet were scratched and muddy. After about 45 minutes of hiking, their guide stopped and pointed ahead. Through the trees, Yeonhee could see a small clearing, and beyond it, more forest that looked identical to what they had just traversed. "There, Cambodia, here Thailand," the guide said, gesturing to an invisible line. "No fence, no soldiers here. You walk across, no problem. On that side, my friend waits with the car." It was absurd and anticlimactic after all the fear and planning, the elaborate operational security and careful coordination. The actual border crossing was simply a matter of walking from one patch of forest into another patch of forest that looked the same. Yet Yeonhee understood that this simplicity was precisely what made this route viable. Official border crossings meant documentation, scrutiny, and records that could be traced. This informal crossing left no paper trail. "Let's go," Minji said quietly, taking Yeonhee's hand. They walked across the invisible line. With that simple act, Yeonhee left behind the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The ideology that had defined every moment of her life since birth, the family she loved and would probably never see again. She stepped into Thailand, into the unknown, into the terrifying possibility of freedom. On the Thai side, as promised, another vehicle waited, a dusty Toyota pickup truck driven by a Thai man who nodded a greeting but spoke no Korean. The drive to Bangkok would take approximately 5 hours. Minji explained, and they would travel mainly on secondary roads to avoid police checkpoints where questions might be asked. As the truck bounced along rural Thai roads, Yeonhee watched the landscape change. They passed Buddhist temples with their distinctive pointed roofs and golden spires, so different from anything in North Korea. They drove through bustling market towns where vendors sold tropical fruits Yeonhee had never seen before. They navigated around the edge of larger cities where modern buildings and shopping centers spoke of a prosperity she had been taught was propaganda, that the capitalist world was suffering while North Korea prospered. The reality before her eyes contradicted everything she had been taught. Thailand was not perfect. She saw poverty too, ramshackle houses and beggars in some areas, but there was also visible abundance, choice, energy. People moved freely, without the rigid formations and careful monitoring that characterized North Korean public spaces. It was overwhelming and disorienting. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they reached Bangkok's outskirts. The city was enormous, sprawling, chaotic in a way that both terrified and exhilarated Yeonhee. Traffic was dense, motorcycles weaving between cars, street vendors setting up evening stalls. Neon signs advertising products and services in Thai script she couldn't read. They arrived at a nondescript apartment building in a middle-class neighborhood around 8 p.m. Minji led Yeonhee up 3 flights of stairs to a small apartment that served as one of the network's safe houses. The door opened before they could knock. Ji-hoon stood there, his face showing relief and joy and exhaustion. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the man who had risked everything to help her and the woman who had risked everything to be free. Then, propriety and caution abandoned, Yeonhee stepped forward into his embrace. And wept for everything she had lost, for everything she had gained, for the impossible journey completed and the uncertain future ahead. "You made it," Ji-hoon whispered into her hair. "You're safe now. You're free." The next morning, January 12, 2017, Ji-hoon accompanied Yeonhee to the South Korean embassy in Bangkok. The embassy staff, clearly experienced with North Korean defector cases, processed her with professional efficiency. She was interviewed by embassy officials, her story documented in detail, her identity verified through multiple layers of questioning. Designed to ensure she was genuinely a defector and not a North Korean agent attempting infiltration. The interviews were exhausting, requiring Yeonhee to recount not just her escape but her entire life. History, her family background, her education, her selection for overseas duty, her motivations for defecting. She had to provide verifiable details about North Korean systems and procedures that only a genuine insider would know. The officials were kind but thorough, and by the end of the day, Yeonhee felt drained and emotionally raw. But finally, late in the afternoon, an embassy official smiled at her with genuine warmth. "Welcome to freedom, Miss Yeonhee. The Republic of Korea is proud to accept you as a citizen." We'll arrange your travel to Seoul within the next few days. You'll enter through the Hanwon Resettlement Center, where you'll receive support in adjusting to South Korean society." That evening, back at the safe house, Yeonhee stood at the window looking out at Bangkok's glittering skyline. Ji-hoon stood beside her, their hands intertwined. "Are you ready for what comes next?" he asked quietly. Yeonhee thought about the question. She had left behind everything familiar, betrayed everyone who trusted her, and destroyed her family's future. She had walked through fear and guilt and desperate hope to reach this moment. The road ahead would be difficult, adjusting to a completely new society, learning to navigate freedom after a lifetime of control. Living with the burden of her choices. But standing there beside Ji-hoon, feeling for the first time in her life that her future was hers to shape, she found her answer. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm ready." The jungle journey was complete. The real journey, learning to be free, was just beginning. The Korean air flight from Bangkok touched down at Incheon International Airport on January 18, 2017, at 6:47 a.m. Yeonhee pressed her face against the window as the plane descended through low clouds. Catching her first glimpse of South Korea, the country she had been taught since childhood to despise as a puppet state suffering under American imperialism, yet which now represented her only path to freedom. From the air, Seoul's sprawling metropolitan area stretched endlessly in every direction. A vast constellation of buildings and highways and bridges that dwarfed anything she had imagined. She had studied maps of South Korea during her university training, had memorized statistics about its geography and infrastructure as part of her ideological education. But the abstract knowledge had not prepared her for the visceral reality of its scale and modernity. Ji-hoon sat beside her, having accompanied her on the flight to ensure a smooth arrival. They had spent the past 6 days in Bangkok, waiting for the embassy to finalize her documentation and prepare her transfer. Those days had been strange and suspended, a liminal space between her old life and her new one. They had talked for hours, filling in the gaps in their knowledge of each other that the clandestine notes under the soap dispenser could never have conveyed. She learned that Ji-hoon was 32 years old, had studied international relations at Korea University, and had lost an uncle who had defected from North Korea in the 1990s, an uncle who had struggled profoundly with the psychological trauma of adjustment and had ultimately taken his own life. That tragedy had driven Ji-hoon to his work with the Defector Support Network. "I couldn't save my uncle," he had told her one evening in Bangkok, his voice heavy with old grief. He made it to freedom, but freedom alone wasn't enough. He needed support, understanding, patience, and help processing the guilt and trauma. "I help defectors now because I want others to have what he didn't." The plane taxied to the gate, and Yeonhee felt her heart hammering. This was it, the moment of truly arriving in the land that was simultaneously her ancestral homeland and a completely foreign country. The embassy officials in Bangkok had briefed her on what to expect. She would be processed through a special protocol for North Korean defectors, bypassing normal immigration procedures. Then she would be transported directly to Hanwon, the government-operated resettlement center located in Ansung, about 90 kilometers south of Seoul, where she would spend the next 12 weeks in intensive orientation and adjustment training. The immigration process was surprisingly quick and efficient. Officials in plain clothes met them at the gate, checking Yeonhee's temporary travel documents and escorting her through a private corridor that avoided the main terminal crowds. She caught only glimpses of Incheon Airport's gleaming modernity designer boutiques, electronic displays, travelers moving with casual purpose before being ushered into a secure waiting area. A middle-aged woman in a conservative business suit introduced herself as Ms. Park from the Ministry of Unification. "Welcome home, Yeonhee SSI," she said with a warm smile. using the respectful Korean honorific that immediately made Yeonhee feel less like a defector and more like a person. I know this must be overwhelming. We're going to take good care of you. The van to Hanawon is ready whenever you are. Ji-hoon was permitted to accompany them in the van, a courtesy extended because of his work with the defector network and his role in Yeonhee's escape. As they drove south from Incheon through the morning traffic, Yeonhee stared out the window in silent amazement. The highways were smooth and well maintained, with multiple lanes flowing in each direction. Cars of every make and color surrounded them, Hyundais and Kias, yes, but also Toyotas, BMWs, Mercedes-Benzes. She had been taught that South Koreans lived in poverty, that only the wealthy elite could afford vehicles. But the evidence before her eyes told a different story. The roadside was dotted with rest stops, gas stations, and commercial developments. Electronic billboards advertised smartphones, cosmetics, movies, and restaurants. Everything moved fast, modern, prosperous. It was disorienting and exhilarating and terrifying all at once. "Are you okay?" Ji-hoon asked quietly, taking her hand. Yeonhee nodded, not trusting her voice. How could she explain what she was feeling? Relief and grief tangled together, excitement and guilt, hope and fear. She had made her choice, had walked away from everything she knew, and now faced the daunting task of building an entirely new life in this bewildering, abundant, overwhelming world. The Hanawon Settlement Support Center for North Korean refugees occupied a secure compound. Surrounded by high walls and security fencing, necessary precautions given that North Korean agents had occasionally attempted to contact or even intimidate defectors undergoing resettlement. The facility itself was modern and well maintained, consisting of several buildings arranged around courtyards and gardens. It reminded Yeonhee somewhat of a university campus, though the security presence made clear this was a specialized facility. Ms. Park and another staff member, a younger woman named Ms. Kim, conducted Yeonhee's intake processing. The procedure was thorough but conducted with surprising gentleness. They documented her personal history, her reasons for defecting, her family background, and her skills and education. They conducted a medical examination, the first comprehensive healthcare screening she had received since leaving North Korea. They provided her with new clothes, jeans, t-shirts, sweaters, underwear, shoes, all in styles and brands she could never have afforded in her previous life. "You'll be in the women's dormitory, Building C," Ms. Kim explained, leading Yeonhee through the compound. "You'll have 3 roommates, all of whom arrived within the past month. The program is 12 weeks. You'll attend classes on South Korean society, economics, culture, and practical skills like using smartphones, banking, and public transportation. You'll also receive psychological counseling and medical care. Our goal is to prepare you to transition successfully into South Korean society." The dormitory room was small but comfortable, far more spacious and private than her accommodations at the Phnom Penh restaurant had been. 4 single beds, 4 small desks, a shared closet, and a private bathroom. The bathroom particularly caught Yeonhee's attention: clean, modern, with a shower, sink, and toilet that were hers to use without requesting permission or documenting usage. Her roommates were not present during the initial tour, they were in afternoon classes, but Ms. Kim provided brief introductions. Sunhee arrived from China 3 weeks ago. She's 31, worked in a factory in Chongjin before crossing the border. Migyong came through Mongolia, she's 27, from Hamhung. And Jeong is your age, 25, came from Pyongyang via Thailand, a similar route to yours. I think you'll find common ground with them. After Ms. Kim departed, Yeonhee sat on her assigned bed, running her hand over the clean cotton bedding. The room was quiet except for the distant sounds of the facility, voices in corridors, doors opening and closing, the everyday sounds of communal living. For the first time in weeks, she was alone with her thoughts, no longer running, no longer in immediate danger, no longer performing or hiding or pretending. The weight of what she had done crashed over her like a wave. She curled up on the bed, pulled her knees to her chest, and wept deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere at the very core of her being. She cried for her mother, who was probably being interrogated at this very moment, forced to denounce the daughter she loved. She cried for her father, whose career and reputation were destroyed by her choice. She cried for her brother, whose future had been sacrificed for her freedom. She cried for the life she had left behind, for the innocence of believing in the system she had served, for the complicated tangle of love and resentment she felt toward her homeland. But she also cried with relief that she no longer had to monitor every word. And thought that she no longer had to perform revolutionary consciousness while dying inside, that she no longer had to watch others being psychologically tortured and remain silent. She cried because she had survived, because against all odds, she had made it to this strange new world, because Ji-hoon's promise of freedom had turned out to be real. That evening, Yeonhee met her roommates. Sunhee was a thin, serious woman with haunted eyes and work-hardened hands. Migyong was more animated, speaking quickly and laughing often, though her laughter had a brittle edge. Jeong was quiet and observant, her Pyongyang accent marking her elite background similar to Yeonhee's own. The woman looking back at her seemed both familiar and strange. Same face, same body, but something in her eyes had changed. There was fear there, certainly, and grief and uncertainty. But there was also something new, a spark of possibility, a tentative recognition of self. A fragile but growing awareness that she was no longer merely a tool of ideology but a person with inherent worth and rights. "This is me," she whispered to her reflection. "Not a servant of the Republic. Not a source of foreign currency. Not a propaganda tool. Just me, Yeonhee. A person who gets to choose her own shampoo." It sounded absurd even as she said it, trivializing the profound sacrifice and suffering that had brought her to this moment. Yet somehow, that bottle of jasmine vanilla shampoo had come to symbolize everything she had risked her life to achieve: the right to exist as herself, to make her own choices, to live according to her own values and desires rather than according to imposed ideology. Over the following days and weeks, Yeonhee began to navigate the overwhelming landscape of freedom. The classes at Hanawan covered practical skills: how to use an ATM, how to navigate Seoul's subway system, how to apply for jobs, how to use a smartphone, but also addressed the psychological and cultural challenges of adjustment. One instructor, Mr. Choi, specialized in explaining South Korean social norms and expectations. "Many defectors struggle with what we call choice fatigue," he explained during one session. "In North Korea, most decisions were made for you: where you lived, where you worked, what you studied, even how you thought. Here, you're expected to make hundreds of decisions every day, from what to eat for breakfast to which career path to pursue. That freedom can be exhausting and overwhelming. It's okay to feel that way. It's normal." Yeonhee found his words deeply validating. She had been struggling with exactly this exhaustion: the mental burden of constant decision-making, the anxiety of wondering if she was making the right choices, the absence of clear guidelines and instructions to follow. The psychological counseling sessions with Dr. Lee were both difficult and essential. Dr. Lee was a patient, empathetic woman in her early 50s who had been working with North Korean defectors for over a decade. She helped Yeonhee begin to process the complex trauma of her experience: not just the dramatic trauma of escape, but the more insidious trauma of having been systematically dehumanized, of having internalized the ideology that had oppressed her, of carrying the burden of guilt for her family's suffering. Guilt is perhaps the most common emotion I see in defectors. Drive. Lee explained during one session. You feel guilty for abandoning your family, guilty for betraying your country, guilty for surviving when others couldn't escape, guilty for wanting happiness. When you know your loved ones are suffering, that guilt is real and valid. But I want you to consider something: your family would not want you to sacrifice your own humanity and well-being out of guilt. Love doesn't demand that level of sacrifice. But they're suffering because of my choice, Yeonhee protested, tears streaming down her face. My father has probably lost his position. My mother is being interrogated. My brother's future is destroyed. How can I be happy knowing that? You can't change what has happened to them, drive. Lee replied gently. That's a harsh truth, but it's the truth. What you can do is honor their sacrifice because it is a sacrifice, whether they made it willingly or not, by building a meaningful life here. By becoming fully human in a way that wasn't possible in North Korea. By eventually, perhaps, helping others who want to escape. Drowning in guilt doesn't help them. Living fully might. The words didn't eliminate Yeonhee's guilt, but they offered a framework for carrying it, a way to move forward without being completely paralyzed by it. Interspersed with the difficult emotional work were moments of pure wonder and delight. Yeonhee's first experience using a smartphone was transformative. The ability to access information instantaneously, to watch videos, to see images from around the world, to connect with others. The Internet, which she had been taught was a tool of Western propaganda and corruption, turned out to be a vast repository of human knowledge and creativity. Her first trip outside Hanawon, a supervised excursion to a nearby shopping mall, was overwhelming. The sheer abundance of goods, clothing stores, electronics shops, cosmetics boutiques, bookstores, food courts was almost incomprehensible. She watched other shoppers moving casually through this abundance, selecting items, comparing prices, making purchases, and realized that what seemed miraculous to her was utterly ordinary to them. At a cosmetics store, the sales associate offered her samples of various products: face creams, lipsticks, eyeshadows, inviting her to try them. Take as many as you want, the associate said cheerfully. There's no obligation to buy anything. Just enjoy trying them. The concept of receiving something for free, with no strings attached and no expectation of loyalty or gratitude, was foreign to Yeonhee. In North Korea, every gift came with obligations, and every benefit required demonstrated loyalty. But here, the sales associate was simply being kind, offering samples as a normal business practice, expecting nothing in return. Except perhaps that Yeonhee might remember the brand favorably. She selected a small sample of hand cream lotus flower scent and thanked the associate profusely. Later, sitting on the bus back to Hanawon, she opened the sample packet and rubbed the cream into her hands, breathing in the delicate floral scent. Another small choice, another small luxury, another tiny brick in the foundation of her new life. Throughout her time at Hanawon, Ji-hoon visited regularly, twice a week, the maximum allowed for non-family members. They would meet in the visitors' room, a comfortable space with couches and coffee tables, and talk for hours. Sometimes they discussed practical matters, and what Yeonhee was learning in her classes, her plans for after graduation from the program. More often, they simply talked about everything and nothing: their favorite foods, memories from childhood, dreams for the future. The small observations and thoughts that people share when building genuine intimacy. During one visit in late February, Ji-hoon brought her a gift, a small potted plant, a jade succulent in a ceramic pot. I thought you might like something living in your room, he explained. Something that grows and changes, that you're responsible for caring for. It's very hard to kill. Succulents are nearly indestructible, so don't worry about doing it wrong. Yeonhee accepted the plant with tears in her eyes, understanding the symbolism. She was like that, succulent, transplanted from her native soil to entirely new conditions, requiring care and patience to adapt and grow, but ultimately resilient and capable of thriving. "I've been thinking about what comes next," she said quietly. "After Hanawan, I want to go back to school. You mentioned that I could study hotel management, use my restaurant experience. I think I'd like that, learning how to create welcoming spaces for people, how to manage hospitality businesses. It feels like taking something from my past and transforming it into something positive." Ji-hoon smiled, his pride evident. "That's a wonderful plan. There are several good programs in Seoul. I can help you research options, apply for the government education support that's available to defectors. You could start classes as early as next fall." "And us?" Yeonhee asked tentatively. "What are we, exactly?" Ji-hoon took her hand, his expression serious and tender. "I've been waiting for you to ask that. Yeonhee, I love you. I've loved you since those early conversations in the restaurant, watching you struggle to maintain your mask while your real self kept breaking through. I love your courage, your intelligence, your capacity for hope even in the darkest circumstances. I want to build a life with you, if you'll have me. But I also want you to take the time you need to discover who you are outside of ideology, outside of surveillance, outside of fear. I'm not going anywhere. We have time. I love you too," Yeonhee replied, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "I think I started loving you the moment you asked me what my life might be like if I were free to choose. You were the first person who ever saw me as a person rather than a tool. However long it takes me to figure out who that person is, I want you there beside me." They sat together in the visitors' room, holding hands, watching the late winter sun stream through the windows, and Yeonhee thought about the jasmine vanilla shampoo, the jade succulent, the ordinary miracle of choice. Freedom was heavier than she had imagined, weighted with grief and guilt and uncertainty. But it was also sweeter, fragrant with possibility, rooted in dignity, growing toward a future she would get to shape with her own hands. She was home. April 12, 2017, marked the completion of Yeonhee's 12-week resettlement program at Hanawan. The graduation ceremony was held in the facility's main auditorium, a modest but dignified event attended by the 23 defectors completing the program that session. Along with Hanawan staff, government officials from the Ministry of Unification, and invited family members or sponsors. Yeonhee sat in the front row wearing a new navy blue dress that Ji-hoon had helped her select during a shopping trip the previous week. The dress was simple and professional, appropriate for the occasion, but to Yeonhee, it represented something profound, the first piece of clothing she had ever chosen entirely for herself, based solely on her own aesthetic preference and comfort. The sales associate had shown her multiple options, and Yeonhee had selected this one because she liked the way the fabric felt against her skin, and the way the color made her feel confident and capable. Such small decisions, what dress to wear, what color suited her, still carried weight and significance. After a lifetime of wearing assigned uniforms, of having her appearance dictated by institutional requirements and ideological standards, the freedom to express herself through clothing choices was simultaneously liberating and overwhelming. Ms. Park, the Ministry of Unification official who had welcomed Yeonhee on her first day in South Korea, delivered the keynote address. "You have all made an extraordinary journey," she said, her voice carrying warmth and respect. "You have crossed not just geographical borders but psychological and cultural ones. You have left behind everything familiar: family, homeland, language patterns, social norms, ways of understanding the world, and you have begun the difficult work of rebuilding your lives in freedom. The 12 weeks you've spent here have provided you with tools and knowledge, but the real work begins now. As you leave Hanawan and enter South Korean society, remember that you are not alone. You have support systems, you have each other, you have a nation that welcomes you as citizens with full rights and dignity. You may face challenges, cultural adjustment, economic difficulties, moments of doubt and loneliness, but you also face limitless possibilities. Your lives are now your own to shape. The words resonated deeply with Yeonhee. Over the past 3 months, she had learned so much practical skills like using public transportation, opening a bank account, operating a smartphone, and navigating job search websites. But she had also learned subtler, more fundamental lessons about living in a free society. She had learned that disagreement was not disloyalty, that questioning authority was not treason, that individual happiness was not selfishness. She had learned that people could hold different opinions and still coexist peacefully, that diversity of thought was valuable rather than threatening, and that criticism of government policies did not make one an enemy of the state. Perhaps most importantly, she had learned or was still learning to trust her own judgment, to recognize her own desires and needs as legitimate, to understand that her worth as a human being was inherent rather than conditional upon service to an ideology or state. When her name was called, Yeonhee walked to the stage to receive her certificate of completion. The document was simple, just a printed statement that she had completed the Hanawon resettlement program, but it carried enormous symbolic weight. It represented her formal transition from North Korean defector to South Korean citizen. From refugee to resident, from person in crisis to person ready to build a new life. As she shook hands with Ms. Park and accepted her certificate, Yeonhee looked out into the audience and found Ji-hoon's face. He was sitting in the third row, beaming with pride, his hands clasped together as if in prayer or gratitude. Their eyes met, and Yeonhee felt a surge of emotion so powerful it threatened to overwhelm her composure. This man had risked his own safety to help her escape, had supported her through the disorienting early weeks of adjustment, had loved her patiently while she figured out who she was becoming. After the ceremony, there was a small reception with tea and simple refreshments. Yeonhee's roommates Sunhee, Migyong, and Ji-hoon clustered together, exchanging contact information and making promises to stay in touch. They had formed a bond forged in shared trauma and shared hope, understanding each other in ways that outsiders never quite could. "Where will you go?" Sunhee asked Yeonhee as they sipped tea and nibbled on rice cakes. "What's your plan?" "Seoul," Yeonhee replied. "Ji-hoon and I are going to find an apartment together. I've been accepted into the hospitality management program at Kyunghee University's evening division, starting in September. Until then, I'll look for work probably in a restaurant or hotel, using my experience from Cambodia." "What about you?" Sunhee's expression was more uncertain. "I'm moving to Incheon. The government is helping me find factory work. It's not glamorous, but it's stable, and I need stability right now. Maybe eventually I'll go back to school, but for now, I just need to establish myself, save some money, learn to navigate this world." Migyong was planning to move to Busan, where she had distant relatives who had defected years earlier. Ji-hoon, like Yeonhee, was planning to pursue higher education nursing school, hoping to work in healthcare. Each of them had different dreams, different paths forward, but all shared the same fundamental challenge: building meaningful lives in a society that was simultaneously their homeland and utterly foreign. As the reception wound down and people began to depart, Yeonhee found herself standing with Dr. Lee, the psychologist who had guided her through so much emotional processing over the past 3 months. "How are you feeling?" Dr. Lee asked gently. "About leaving, about what comes next." Yeonhee considered the question carefully. "Scared," she admitted. "Hanawon has been a protected space, controlled and supportive. Out there," she gestured vaguely toward the windows, toward the world beyond the facility's walls, "I'll have to navigate everything on my own." Make all my own decisions, deal with prejudice and misunderstanding, figure out who I am and who I want to become. It's terrifying. But, Dr. Lee prompted, sensing there was more. But also exciting, Yeonhee continued, a small smile forming. For the first time in my life, my future is genuinely uncertain in a way that feels like possibility rather than threat. I don't know exactly what will happen, what career I'll have, what kind of person I'll become. And that uncertainty, as scary as it is, also feels like freedom. Like my life is a story that's still being written, and I'm the one holding the pen. Dr. Lee smiled warmly. That's exactly the right perspective. Remember, Yeonhee, adjustment isn't linear. You'll have good days and difficult days. You'll have moments when you feel completely comfortable in South Korean society and moments when you feel like a complete foreigner. That's normal. Be patient with yourself. And remember, I'm always available if you need support. My door and my phone line are always open. They embraced, and Yeonhee felt profound gratitude for this woman who had helped her begin the process of healing and self-discovery. Then she turned to find Ji-hoon waiting by the door, ready to begin their next chapter together. Ji-hoon had spent the past 2 weeks apartment hunting, understanding that Yeonhee would need a stable, comfortable place to land after leaving Hanaewon. He had found a small one-bedroom apartment in Mapo district. A neighborhood in western Seoul known for its blend of traditional and modern, its proximity to Hongdae University area with its vibrant youth culture, and its relatively affordable rents. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a modest building, about 50 square meters, tiny by Western standards but typical for Seoul. It had a small kitchen area, a combined living and sleeping space, and a bathroom with a modern shower. Most importantly, it had large windows that let in abundant natural light, and it was theirs, a space they could shape according to their own preferences and needs. Their first night in the apartment, they sat on the floor, eating takeout chicken and beer, a quintessentially South Korean meal that Yeonhee had learned about during her Hanaewon cultural orientation classes but had never actually experienced. The fried chicken was crispy and flavorful, seasoned with garlic and soy sauce. Utterly different from the plain boiled chicken she had occasionally eaten in North Korea. The beer was cold and refreshing, and the simple act of eating casually on the floor, without formality or ritual, felt deliciously normal. I never imagined this, Yeonhee said quietly, looking around the empty apartment. They hadn't yet acquired much furniture, just some sleeping mats, a small folding table, and a few basic kitchen supplies. But it was theirs. When I was in Cambodia, performing for customers and attending those endless self-criticism sessions, I couldn't picture what freedom would actually look like in concrete terms. I had abstract ideas, being able to think my own thoughts, make my own choices, but I couldn't visualize the daily reality. And this, she gestured at their humble surroundings, this is it. This is what I was fighting for. The right to sit on the floor of our own apartment, eating fried chicken and making plans. Ji-hoon reached over and took her hand. I know it's not much, he said. The apartment is small, we don't have much furniture yet, and building a life here will take time and effort. But we'll do it together. What do you need, Yeonhee? What would make this place feel like home? Yeonhee thought about the question. In North Korea, the concept of home had been inseparable from ideology. Home was where you displayed portraits of the supreme leader, where you listened to state radio broadcasts, where you conducted family self-criticism sessions. At the Phnom Penh restaurant, home had been a prison of surveillance and performance. But what did home mean here, in freedom? Books, she said finally. I want shelves full of books that I've chosen to read. History, literature, poetry, practical guides, everything. I want to fill my mind with knowledge and stories that I select for myself. And plants, I want to grow things, nurture living things that depend on me and thrive under my care. And photographs. Once we have memories together, I want photographs on the walls, reminders of the life we're building. And music, I want to be able to play whatever music I want, whenever I want, without worrying about whether it's ideologically appropriate." Ji-hoon smiled, pulling out his smartphone. "Let's start with music. What do you want to hear right now?" Yeonhee had been introduced to South Korean pop music during her time at Hanwon. The other defectors had played various songs, and she had been amazed by the diversity and creativity of the music industry. But her favorite discovery had been IU, a singer-songwriter whose voice and lyrics touched something deep in Yeonhee's heart. "IU," she said. "Play Through the Night. That song makes me feel like everything will be okay." As IU's gentle voice filled their empty apartment, singing about comforting someone through darkness until morning comes, Yeonhee leaned against Ji-hoon's shoulder and felt something she had never quite experienced before: contentment. Not happiness exactly, there was still too much grief and guilt and uncertainty for uncomplicated happiness, but a sense of rightness, of being exactly where she was supposed to be. Over the following weeks, they slowly transformed the apartment into a home. They bought a proper bed, a small sofa, and a dining table with 2 chairs. They installed shelves and began filling them with books, Korean literature, English language learning materials, cookbooks, travel guides. Yeonhee bought her first smartphone, a modest but functional model that opened up worlds of possibility for connection and learning. She spent hours exploring the internet, watching YouTube videos about everything. From makeup tutorials to cooking lessons to documentaries about places she had never heard of. She also began job hunting. The government provided financial support for the first year after defection, a settlement allowance and housing subsidy, but Yeonhee wanted to work, to contribute, to begin building the professional experience that would support her long-term goals. With Ji-hoon's help, she prepared a resume that honestly acknowledged her North Korean background while highlighting her skills and experience. She applied to various hotels and restaurants in Seoul, understanding that her lack of South Korean work experience would be a significant challenge. The job interviews were difficult. Despite South Korea's official policy of welcoming North Korean defectors as fellow citizens, prejudice and misunderstanding were common. Some potential employers were uncomfortable with her background, worried about how customers might react, or concerned about her ability to adapt to South Korean work culture. Others were overly curious, treating her defector status as exotic or fascinating, asking inappropriate questions about life in North Korea when they should have been discussing her qualifications for the position. But in mid-May, she finally received a job offer from the Grand Hyatt Seoul, a 5-star hotel in the Hanam-dong area. The hotel's HR director, Ms. Shin, was a thoughtful woman who had experience working with diverse staff and saw Yeonhee's background as an asset rather than a liability. "You have direct experience with North Korean service culture," Ms. Shin explained during their final interview. "You're fluent in Korean, English, and Mandarin. You understand what it means to work in high-pressure hospitality environments. And you have a perspective on customer service that most South Korean workers don't have. I think you could be excellent in our guest relations department." Yeonhee accepted the position immediately. The starting salary was modest, and she would be working evening shifts 4 p.m. to midnight, but it was professional work in a respected establishment, and it aligned with her long-term goal of studying hospitality management. Her start date was June 1, 2017, giving her a few weeks to prepare. The evening she received the job offer, Ji-hoon took her to a restaurant in Gangnam, an upscale neighborhood that Yeonhee had previously only seen through bus windows. The restaurant was elegant and modern, serving Korean fusion cuisine that blended traditional flavors with contemporary techniques. It was the kind of place that would have been completely inaccessible to her in her previous life, not just economically, but conceptually. The idea that ordinary people could simply decide to eat at an expensive restaurant, that such decisions were normal and unremarkable, still felt slightly surreal to her. Over dinner she ordered braised short ribs with a gochujang glaze. He chose grilled fish with seasonal vegetables. Ji-hoon seemed nervous, fidgeting with his chopsticks and stumbling over his words. Yeonhee noticed but said nothing, assuming he was tired from work. When their dessert arrived, a delicate arrangement of green tea ice cream, sweet red bean, and rice cakes, Ji-hoon suddenly stood up, came around to her side of the table, and knelt beside her chair. "Yeonhee," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "I had a whole speech prepared, but I'm forgetting all of it, so I'm just going to speak from my heart. These past 5 months have been the most meaningful of my life. Watching you transform from someone trapped and terrified into someone confident and hopeful has been an incredible privilege. You are the bravest person I've ever known. You walked away from everything familiar to pursue freedom, and now you're building a beautiful new life with determination and grace. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone. I want to wake up next to you every morning, support your dreams, share your struggles, celebrate your victories, and grow old with you. Will you marry me?" He produced a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a simple but elegant ring, a single diamond on a gold band, modest and beautiful. Yeonhee stared at the ring, then at Ji-hoon's earnest face, and felt tears streaming down her cheeks. In North Korea, marriages were often arranged or heavily influenced by family and party considerations, social class matching, and ideological compatibility. Romantic love existed, certainly, but it was always secondary to collective concerns. The idea that she could simply choose to marry someone because she loved him, because he loved her, because they wanted to build a life together, it was still somewhat miraculous to her. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, absolutely yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger. They had secretly measured her ring size weeks earlier, during a casual shopping trip, and it fit perfectly. They embraced in the middle of the restaurant while other diners applauded, a spontaneous celebration of their love by strangers who knew nothing about them, except that they were two people choosing each other. Later that night, back in their apartment, lying in bed with the lights of Seoul glowing through the windows, Yeonhee studied the ring on her finger. "I want a small wedding," she said quietly. "Just us, really, and a few close friends. I can't invite my family, they don't even know where I am, and any contact would endanger them further. It will be strange, getting married without my mother present, without my father walking me down the aisle. But I want to marry you, want to make that commitment official and public. We'll make it beautiful," Ji-hoon promised. "We'll create our own traditions, our own rituals. We'll honor your family in our hearts while building our own family going forward." Over the following weeks, they made plans for both their wedding and their future. They decided on a simple ceremony at a small wedding hall in August, before Yeonhee's university classes began in September. The guest list would be tiny Ji-hoon's parents and younger sister, a few of his colleagues from the Defector Support Network, Yeonhee's roommates from Hanawan, Drive, Lee and Ms. Park, and a handful of other people who had supported their journey. Ji-hoon's parents had been initially uncertain about their son marrying a North Korean defector. They were not politically conservative or prejudiced, but they worried about the practical challenges, the cultural adjustment difficulties, the psychological trauma Yeonhee carried, the impossibility of ever meeting her family or understanding her full background. But when they met Yeonhee for the first time in late May, over dinner at their home in the suburbs of Seoul, their concerns had melted away. Yeonhee had been terrified about the meeting, worried about making a good impression, about saying something wrong, or revealing some gap in her knowledge of South Korean customs. But Ji-hoon's mother, Mrs. Kim, had welcomed her with immediate warmth, embracing her and saying, "Any woman who loves my son enough to build a life with him is already family to me." Over dinner, they asked her about her experiences, not probing or inappropriate questions, but a genuine interest in understanding her perspective and journey. Ji-hoon's father, Mr. Kim, was a retired high school history teacher, and he asked thoughtful questions about the North Korean education system and ideology. His sister, Min-ji, who was studying graphic design at university, wanted to know about Yeonhee's plans and dreams. "I'm starting university in September," Yeonhee explained, feeling increasingly comfortable as the evening progressed. Hospitality management at Kyunghee University's evening program. "I'm working at the Grand Hyatt now, in guest relations, and I love it. Long-term, I want to become a hotel manager, maybe eventually open my own guest house or small hotel. I want to create spaces where people feel welcomed and valued, where they can rest and be themselves. I think my experiences both in North Korea and in Cambodia have given me a deep understanding of what it means to feel trapped and controlled. I want to create the opposite of that, spaces of freedom and comfort." Mrs. Kim had smiled with genuine pride. "That's a wonderful vision, Yeonhee. And we're so glad Ji-hoon found you. He's been doing this defector support work for years, always giving so much of himself to help others. It's beautiful to see him receiving love and support in return." As they left Ji-hoon's parents' home that evening, Yeonhee felt lighter than she had in months. She was building a new family, creating connections that were based on choice and love rather than obligation and blood. It didn't erase the grief of losing her North Korean family. But it offered a kind of healing, a reminder that humans are capable of forming multiple families throughout their lives. In July, Yeonhee began preparing for her university classes. She enrolled in a pre-semester intensive English program. Her English was functional, but not fluent, and many of the hospitality management textbooks would be in English. She also met with an academic advisor who helped her understand the curriculum, the expectations, and the support services available to her as both a non-traditional student and a North Korean defector. The university had a small but growing population of North Korean defectors, and the school provided specialized academic counseling and peer mentoring programs. Yeonhee was connected with a mentor, a senior student named Hyunwoo, who had defected 5 years earlier and was now completing a degree in business administration. "The first semester is the hardest," Hyunwoo told her over coffee at a campus cafe. "Not just academically, though that's challenging too, but psychologically. You'll be surrounded by South Korean students who grew up here, who take so much for granted that seems miraculous to us. They'll complain about things that seem trivial, being slightly bored in a class, having to wait in line for lunch, and their parents suggesting they should study more. And you'll think about what real problems are, what real hardship looks like. Try not to be resentful. Their easy lives aren't their fault, and your difficult journey doesn't make you superior or give you the right to judge them. But it's okay to feel frustrated sometimes. Just find people who understand other defectors, supportive professors, friends like me, and process those feelings constructively." Yeonhee appreciated the honesty and advice. She was nervous about starting university, worried about keeping up academically, about fitting in socially, about balancing work and study. But she was also excited to challenge herself, to expand her knowledge, to work toward professional goals that she had chosen for herself. August 19, 2017, was unseasonably cool for a Seoul summer, with a gentle breeze tempering the usual humidity. Yeonhee woke early in the small apartment she would soon officially share as a married woman, feeling a mixture of joy and melancholy. This was her wedding day, a day that should have been filled with her mother's joyful tears, her father's proud smile, her brother's teasing jokes. Instead, she was surrounded by the new family and friends she had found in freedom, people who loved and supported her, but who could never fully replace those she had lost. The ceremony was held at a small wedding hall in Gangnam, decorated simply with white flowers and soft lighting. Yeonhee wore a traditional white wedding dress borrowed from a friend, altered to fit her petite frame, and she felt beautiful and terrified and hopeful all at once. She carried a small bouquet of roses and baby's breath, and pinned to her dress was a tiny photograph of her family, taken years ago, during a rare happy moment that she had managed to bring with her from North Korea, or tucked into the lining of her purse. There was no one to walk her down the aisle. Her father was thousands of miles away, probably in a labor camp because of her choices, so she walked alone, slowly and deliberately, toward Ji-hoon, who stood at the altar with tears streaming down his face. The ceremony was brief and simple. A friend of Ji-hoon's, a minister who worked with the defector community, officiated. He spoke about love as an act of courage, about choosing to build a life with someone, despite uncertainty and fear, about the profound human need for connection and commitment. When it came time for vows, Yeonhee and Ji-hoon had written their own. Ji-hoon went first, his voice strong despite his tears. "Yeonhee, you have taught me what real courage looks like. You walked away from everything you knew to pursue freedom, and in doing so, you showed me what it means to truly live according to your values rather than just talking about them. I promise to honor your journey by supporting your dreams, by loving you through both joy and struggle, by creating a home where you always feel safe to be fully yourself. I promise to remember that freedom is precious and fragile, that it must be nurtured and protected, that it's never something to take for granted. I promise to be your partner, your friend, your support, and your love, for all the days of our lives." Then it was Yeonhee's turn. She took a deep breath, looking at Ji-hoon's face, at this man who had risked so much to help her escape, who had loved her patiently while she figured out who she was becoming. "Ji-hoon, you were the first person who ever saw me as a complete human being rather than a tool of ideology or a source of labor. You asked me what my life might be like if I were free to choose, and that question changed everything. I promise to never take for granted the freedom you helped me achieve, to honor the sacrifice of everyone who made my escape possible by living fully and meaningfully. I promise to love you not out of gratitude or obligation, but because you are genuinely good and kind and brave. Because you make me want to be better, because building a life with you is the choice I would make over and over again. I promise to be your partner in creating a family built on choice and love rather than obligation and control. And I promise that someday, when I'm strong enough, when I've built a stable enough life, I will find ways to help others achieve the freedom we now share. This is my promise to you and to myself." They exchanged rings, Ji-hoon's matching the engagement ring he had given her months earlier, and the minister pronounced them married. As they kissed for the first time as husband and wife, Yeonhee felt something shift inside her. She was no longer just a defector, a refugee, a person defined by what she had fled. She was a wife, a student, a hotel employee, a person building a meaningful life in freedom. She was Yeonhee, fully herself, with a future she would shape with her own hands. The reception was held in the same venue, a small gathering with food, music, and speeches. Dr. Lee gave a toast that made everyone cry, speaking about the resilience of the human spirit and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. Ji-hoon's father welcomed Yeonhee formally into their family, promising to love her as a daughter. Hyun-woo, her university mentor, spoke about the growing community of North Korean defectors who were succeeding in South Korea, building careers and families and contributing to society, proof that it was possible to not just survive but thrive. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Yeonhee found herself standing by the window, looking out at Seoul's nighttime skyline, millions of lights representing millions of people living their ordinary, extraordinary lives. Ji-hoon came to stand beside her, wrapping his arm around her waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked quietly. "I'm thinking about my family," Yeonhee admitted. "Wondering where they are right now, what they're doing, if they hate me or understand me or some complicated mixture of both. I'm thinking about all the other people still trapped in North Korea, still living under that suffocating system, still dreaming of freedom. I'm thinking about how lucky I am to be here, how much I've received, how much I owe." "You don't owe anyone your happiness," Ji-hoon said gently, an echo of Dr. Lee's counsel from months ago. "I know," Yeonhee replied. "Or at least, I'm learning to know that. But I do owe something to the future. Someday, when I'm established in my career, when I have stability and resources, I want to help others escape. I want to be part of the network that helped me. I want to stand in that restaurant or office, or factory where someone is suffocating, and ask them what their life might be like if they were free to choose. I want to be for someone else what you were for me." Ji-hoon pulled her closer. "We'll do it together. That's what marriage means, sharing not just a home and a life, but also a purpose. Your dream becomes our dream." As midnight approached, they left the wedding hall and drove to their apartment, their first night there as husband and wife. The small space now felt rich with possibility. Yeonhee's textbooks for her upcoming classes were stacked on the shelf, waiting. The schedule for her work shifts at the hotel was posted on the refrigerator. The jade succulent Ji-hoon had given her months ago sat on the windowsill, thriving and growing new leaves. Photographs from their wedding would soon join the small gallery they were building on the walls. Before bed, Yeonhee stood in their bathroom, in their apartment, in their life, and reached for the bottle of jasmine vanilla shampoo that had come to symbolize her freedom. She opened it and breathed in the scent, remembering that moment months ago at Hanawan, when she had first understood what it meant to make a choice purely for herself. "Thank you," she whispered, not sure whether she was speaking to Ji-hoon. Sleeping in the next room, to the forces of chance and timing that had brought them together, to her own courage, or to some larger benevolence in the universe that she was only beginning to understand. "Thank you for this life. I promise I will not waste it." She set the bottle down and looked at her reflection. Yeonhee, 25 years old, defector, hotel worker, university student, wife, dreamer. The woman looking back at her was no longer performing, no longer hiding, afraid to be seen. She was simply herself, living freely, choosing her own path. And that, she realized with profound gratitude and determination, was everything she had ever wanted and more than she had ever dared to dream. The journey toward freedom had been terrifying and costly. But standing here now, in her own bathroom, in her own life, choosing her own future, Yeonhee knew with absolute certainty that it had been worth every sacrifice, every tear, every moment of fear. She was home. She was free. She was alive. And tomorrow, she would wake up and continue building the life she had chosen, one small decision, one meaningful choice, one act of courage at a time. This was her promise. This was her dream. This was her new beginning.